So this is from like the new It series, right? Barbara compares brutal first episode of It Welcome to Derry to Game of Thrones. We love it. It's a red wedding. Should we even look at this? Because I kind of want to talk about the sentiment more than this exact quote. I don't even know. So anyway, I want to talk about this sentiment because I keep seeing it pop up and it's driving me insane. For the longest time, even with shows like Avatar and stuff, right? People keep saying this is the next Game of Thrones. This is the whatever Game of Thrones, right? And I think a big part of that is just pointless marketing, right? Just throwing out random buzzwords, because I think for a lot of people, the only thing that I think basically what people say Game of Thrones is number one, you follow the bad guy, right? Like one of the big things about Game of Thrones is that it treats the good guys and the bad guys as equal point of view characters. Not a lot of stories do this, right? So Game of Thrones doesn't really discriminate against the characters that it's following. So that's one thing about Game of Thrones. Number two, you kill off everyone, right? It was the same thing about like, this series is even more brutal than The Walking Dead, something like that, right? And number three, it's just that it's shocking. But all of these things miss the point of what it's actually doing, and I think this is like the best example of this. It's a red wedding. What it's conveying here, I think, is that the red wedding was just subverting expectations because it came out of nowhere and people died. But that's not what the red wedding wasn't that. The red wedding was surprising as all hell. But what made the red wedding hit was that it was a precise, calculated A to B to C to whatever. And then you just hit a brick wall where the consequences of everything that had happened before came to a explosive and unpredictable climax, right? You cannot have a red wedding in episode 1. Because what made the red wedding was all of the things that had happened beforehand to make you... It almost gave you the impression that you were being boxed in by the events that are unfolding until you go to the red wedding and there is no way out. Everything you did, everything we thought we had achieved, none of that matters and everything slams into a cold wall. You literally cannot do this in episode 1. You need all of those character motivations, character actions, all of these things to even set up a red wedding. Like what? What? The red wedding isn't just surprise, everyone dies. Can't do that. In the same way that killing Ned Stark, it has to happen at the end of season 1. Because all of season 1 is setting up this idea of good guys in a bad world, right? And then you kill that fantasy. You can't do it in episode 1 and say that you're the next Game of Thrones. It doesn't work like that. Red Wedding was a natural culmination of events up until then. It wasn't gore and death for pure shock value. Exactly. That's one of the strongest points of George's writing. George's writing is always this delicate dance that balances this knife's edge in terms of like what could happen, what could go wrong. And the Red Wedding is like the perfect encapsulation of this, because it is so much individual character narratives that are interweaving until it comes to a boiling point and there is no more escape, right? And that's what makes it hit. Because there is no more wiggle room, what ifs, nothing. You're purely boxed in and there is nothing more you could do. And that's what makes it great. As opposed to just episode 1 kills everyone. Like, huh? Oh my god. Oh my god, this is driving me insane. The next Game of Thrones. And I do wonder whether like this is legitimate. Again, not about this line, this is whatever. Because this is not just a it issue. This is again, Avatar everything. And I do wonder whether a lot of these things that people talk about are actually kind of giveaways that a lot of these people who are working on these shows, they don't really maybe even understand what exactly made these series successful. Because there is so many people are doing this parroting of this is just like Game of Thrones when it's like patently not. And I don't know if it's just marketing or it's truly that a lot of these people who are working on a lot of these things just exist in some kind of echo chamber or bubble and they just don't really understand what made Game of Thrones so successful. Because I think a lot of people, even if you understand how George did it, replicating it is extremely hard, right? So understanding is only one part of this, but I think a lot of people even fail at step 1 of understanding it seems like. So I don't know, I just keep hearing it, it's driving me insane. I don't see a lot of comparisons to Breaking Bad since it's in its own league. Yeah, I think Breaking Bad was like such a tightly written character narrative that I think like people just shy away from comparing it to Breaking Bad. The only show I've seen compared to Breaking Bad is like Ozark. I think that's the only thing I've ever seen likened to Breaking Bad. And that's about it. But with Game of Thrones, it was like such a all-encompassing broad fantasy story that I think anything big budget fantasy, it's like Game of Thrones. It doesn't matter that like none of it is in any way congruent with the fantasy and with the ideas and philosophy of Game of Thrones. There is dragons and it's fantasy. Game of Thrones. Whenever people draw these comparisons, I always get a little bit mad because like it's I think it's a mixed bag, because on one hand there is a lot you can communicate by making a comparison like this, right? So there is a kernel of just like communicating ideas, which is totally fine, right? Like I understand that, but a lot of the time it is just so off base that like you just don't. If showrunners had reading literary comprehension, we wouldn't be in this situation. Yeah, I mean that's always like the crux of making something versus critiquing it. It's not the same skill set at all, right? There are lots and lots and lots of film critiques who could never make a movie themselves, and there are lots of people who have made incredible things who can't critique other shows. It's a completely different skill set, I think. So I understand it to an extent, right? Because I think a lot of the time, the people who do very very successful creative work themselves, they're not doing it as a science. It comes to them like naturally, and they have a very fine control of how they convey ideas that just work. Like people personally find themselves invested in it and stuff, right? There is like no calculus or like structure behind it. Whereas when you're critiquing something, I think you approach it like much more methodically, right? So it's a very very different way of looking at things, I think. So I give them leeway, but at the same time, like, just don't compare it to. I mean, even George, like, George always says that, like, he finds it a little bit weird that Game of Thrones is compared to Lord of the Rings, even though Game of Thrones, in many ways, draws on like a lot of Lord of the Rings, right? George has always said that, like, he finds it, he thinks it's a compliment, but like the comparison is kind of iffy. Even though, like, I do think much of A Song of Ice and Fire is like almost a direct response to Game of Thrones. Not Game of Thrones, to Lord of the Rings. But yeah. One Piece live action! The next Game of Thrones!